This is Orlando. This is where we believe in magic and fantasies and wishing upon stars and the power of the imagination. This is where we dream, where we think smarter and play harder. So if you think you know all there is to know about Orlando, you're in for a big surprise. Because until you join our community and see all the reasons we're amazing, you don't know the half of it.
I go to Princeton University, majoring in psychology.
I go to Harvard and I'm majoring in economics.
I'm going to Duke and I'm majoring in psychology and global health.
I'm going to Johns Hopkins and I'm majoring in chemistry.
Our advantage, great teachers and programs at Orange County Public Schools. See what's possible for you.
There are magnet programs, advanced placement and honors classes, and guidance counselors who help us choose the right courses.
You can even earn college credit while in high school.
OCPS has programs for every type of learner.
Orange County Public Schools, leading students to success.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this joint meeting between the school board and the Board of County Commissioners. I want to welcome our brothers and sisters on the County Commission to our new digs. For the longest time, we felt like we really couldn't have people in our house because we didn't have an appropriate setting, and we were a little bit envious of our county commissioners because y'all have such a beautiful chamber. And we just want to thank you for coming over here this evening and allowing us to host this year and to show off our new chambers. So thank you for this, Mayor Jacobs and County Commissioners. Thank you very, very much for this. I also want to thank Mayor Jacobs for making these meetings happen. They've been on the books for a long time, but for years, these joint meetings between the school board and the County Commission did not happen. And it was through her efforts and initiative with the support of her commissioners that they started up again. And I think that they're a wonderful idea, and thank you for making those happen again, Mayor Jacobs. I also want to say that what I love about this meeting is we do so much together, whether it's in after-school programs that are primarily funded and provided by the county, health programs, social service programs. I always tell folks that the county is by far, without a doubt, in Central Florida, the largest provider of health services, social services, after-school programs. You're wonderful partners in everything that we do for the children of Orange County. And even though we've had a speed bump here and there on occasion, I think that sometimes that overshadows the fact that really we work together cooperatively in so many arenas. And I want to thank Mayor Jacobs and each and every one of the county commissioners for that as well. Tonight we are here to hold a joint meeting primarily on the school siding ordinance. And I've long been a believer, and I know that the mayor and the individual commissioners and my board shares this belief that one of the ways that we can avoid future conflicts when it comes to siding schools is to simply amend our school siding ordinance and find a way to create a better process. I really do believe that it's a process issue as much as anything else. The mayor shares that belief, I believe, and as do the county commissioners, and I want to thank them for their efforts in helping us create a better process. I do want to stress to anybody in the audience tonight and anybody who may end up watching this at home that, and Mayor, please don't hesitate to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I want to reiterate to my board that we don't expect anything to be decided with any finality tonight. Tonight is almost what I would call the middle of the discussion. It's not the beginning of the discussion, because as you will hear, our staffs have been hard at work trying to figure out which approaches work best for the people of Orange County and the students and families of Orange County when it comes to the school siding ordinance. Tonight's meeting is primarily designed to give the County Commission and the school board an update on the progress that has been made, an update on the areas of agreement, and an update on areas of continued discussion. What I expect to be the process going forward is after this meeting, our staffs will continue to work together and seek to reach consensus on the proposed changes to the school siding ordinance. And once that consensus is reached between our board and between the county commission, then ultimately that product will come back to the school board, and ultimately it will come to the county commission, who will have final say on adopting that proposed school siting ordinance. So again, to reiterate, this is not the final stop. We still have a ways to go, but we've made tremendous progress. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Jacobs, but before I do, I want to say thank you to our various staffs. A lot of times, very, very hard work goes on behind the scenes that the general public does not see, and they've been working extremely hard on not just this presentation, but on the entire school siting ordinance for literally, I believe, the last 14 to 16 months. And this is, again, not the culmination of that process, but it is a one-way stop towards the culmination of that process. And I just noticed, and I would be remiss in not recognizing Commissioner Olszewski is with us in the room tonight. Thank you, Bobby, for being here. And if I've omitted any other elected officials, forgive me, but I don't see any others off the top of my head in the room tonight. But thank you for coming, Commissioner. Mayor Jacobs. Use that one.
Yeah, don't take this personally, though. It's nothing that you said. Can you hear me now? Am I on? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. I have not been back in these chambers in a while, and I'm not quite sure when you finished this process. But I have to admit, I walked in and I was just kind of stunned. I mean, this isn't Thursday, but it feels like Throwback Thursday for me, because I spent so much time in this building and in these chambers for so many years as my kids grew up. And so it's really an exciting opportunity to be here in your home and being your guest for this meeting. And you mentioned the requirement in our comp plan to hold these meetings. That was actually something as a private citizen that I did as a private citizen. I drove poor Chris Testerman nuts, and he was like junior planner at the time, and we have both survived those early years. And so this was something I thought was really important for the two governmental bodies to work together and to have these conversations, and I'm glad that we're here today doing that. And I think you've outlined really well, Chairman, what we're hoping to accomplish today, and the open dialogue is, I think, really beneficial. And I think also to have a little bit of an understanding of the different roles and responsibilities, which are different. And I think occasionally are the challenges that we run into is that we have slightly different constituencies and slightly different responsibilities. But at the end of the day, we all have the same goal in mind, and I think we've done a tremendous job. I honestly continue to think that Orange County Public Schools and Orange County government have led the way statewide in some very important initiatives, including what we've done being the first, I think, in the state to have a school siting ordinance, as well as being the first in the state to have a charter amendment dealing with school overcrowding. So I look forward to more initiatives moving forward, and hope that we can arrive at a place that we all agree will serve us better when it comes to school siting. With that, shall we open it up? Okay.
So with this, let me turn it over to Mr. Testerman to take us away. Mr. Testerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Who is no longer the junior planner, by the way.
Just recently. And Mayor Jacobs. So in terms of tonight's presentation, here's the presentation outline. At the dais, you should have a copy of the PowerPoint and agenda, as well as an actual copy of the existing school siting ordinance, if you want to look at that when we get to that section. So in terms of the outline, we'll briefly talk about the purpose. Alberto Vargas, from the manager of the planning division, will talk about the development activity in the county. He'll take you through a kind of a ride around the county from 30,000 feet, talk about what's happening in the county. And then Dr. McGowan will talk about the challenges and the processes for projecting where schools are needed and how they do that internally. And then myself, Ms. Fernandez and Mr. Rodriguez will talk about the school siting ordinance. It's a very linear presentation. We'll walk you through the existing ordinance, the way it's laid out. Then we'll talk about kind of the low-hanging fruit in terms of where we have a consensus. Talk about some other concepts that still need some vetting. And then lastly, the board staff will talk about the relationship of school siting and charter schools, and then we'll briefly talk about next steps. So with that, I think this has already been said. This is straight out of the element from 1997 that talks about why we meet, and it's essentially to discuss anything of mutual interest. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Vargas.
Thank you, Chris. Mayor, Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to be here to give you that overall view of Orange County's activities. We have generally approached a market area analysis of county-wide development scenarios for two specific reasons. We think it needs to be context sensitive as we understand the holistic approach of development, and it, more importantly, serves as a foundation for a future land development code update, which is in the works at this particular time. Identifies the quality of growth and, more importantly, develops a sense of place. So in terms of that, let me just go ahead and share with you that through the analysis process of understanding a holistic approach, we have identified 6 different market areas. When we calibrate those into context sensitivity, we begin to identify a direct relationship to Mayor Jacobs' sustainability initiative, the plan that is currently in an implementation mode, and a land development code update that is about to begin. We wanted to put in perspective the growth projection to a 2040, 25-year projection, and really understand where is growth happening within Orange County. And when we zoom into those particular market areas, which would be the core, the southwest, and the south market area, we understand that about 79% of, about 50% of today's population is going to be focused within those specific market areas. So special attention needs to be paid as we move forward to a land development code update and, again, context sensitivity within those market areas. So if you would allow me to just go ahead and get started with all of the market areas and just frame them for you. The market area number 1, the northwest market area, is characterized by a small town character coming from 4 different municipalities and 7 rural settlements. 2 of our very important rural settlements, Tangerine and Selwood, are within that specific market area. We also have an ecotourism planning initiative, which is the Lake Apopka restoration project, which happens to be within that particular market area number 1 as well. When we look at within this market area, the school locations, we identified 18 elementary schools, 5 middle schools, and 3 high schools within that market area. Market area number 2 would be the southwest market area, and this is a region that's evolving from its roots of the citrus agriculture into a new mosaic of lifestyles. There, as you know, Horizon West is part of this particular market area, the first sector plan in the state of Florida, with the boundary area of the Convention Center district is also within this market area, and we can see the magnet that this has in relationship to a Central Florida-wide attraction of over 60 million people visiting the area because it goes beyond existing context. So let me just put in reference what's happening within Horizon West. We have over 20,000 acres and an approval of SAP number of units of over 40,000 dwelling units in this area. And in terms of permits going on, from 2002 to 2015, we have an average of 573 permits per year. And just to point out that if you look at that chart in 2006, you saw the majority of the permits taking place over 1,000, and today in 2015 we are at 1,138. So you can see how dynamic this particular area is in terms of development. Again, in terms of just general, a single family over 6,000, multifamily 678 dwelling units, and commercial 510,000 square feet of commercial in terms of approved PSPs and DPs requested between 2012 and 2015. Moving on to the Convention Center district itself, we've identified a process of a three-phasing plan area within a 5-year, 15-year, and 25-year horizon that identified the growth infill and redevelopment of that whole area. We just had a general presentation earlier this morning about the 2040 vision plan of that overall district. When we look at PD entitlements within this particular area, we look at somewhere between 34% and 83% of entitlements that are remaining. So you can see the amount of growth and infill and redevelopment that are still entitled within this particular district of the Convention Center district study area. Looking at, in terms of the school locations, we have elementary school, 21 elementary schools, 7 middle schools, and 3 high schools within the southwest market area. Moving on to the core market area, we would like to just highlight the fact that Pine Hills is part of this, going through a town center revival process. We also have one of the terminal stations, which is the Sand Lake Station for Sunrail, creating a transit-oriented development with future land infill and redevelopment, looking at ways of development in Orange County that we haven't experienced in the past. In terms of schools within this particular core market area, we identified 51 elementary schools, 12 middle schools, and 7 high schools. The East Market area number 4, is obviously the anchor. It's anchored by UCF, the second largest university in the nation, and it continues to proceed with the implementation of a master plan great framework of infill and redevelopment throughout that whole market area as well, projecting north-south connection to the South Market area, an innovation way more importantly. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with in terms of the schools within the East Market area. We have 22 elementary, 5 middle schools, and 2 high schools that we have identified within this particular market area. And then the South Market area, or market area number 5, is globally connected through the hub of transportation in terms of the Orlando International Airport, and Innovation Way obviously is part of this particular South Market area. Meadowood Station, which would be the second station within the Sunrail transit system, is also part of this. So you can see the dynamics of growth in this particular market area. When it comes to Innovation Way, we have over 12,000 units of residential and over 9 million square feet of non-residential units. And as it comes to, in terms of specific schools in the area, we have 12 elementary schools, 5 middle schools, and 3 high schools. Then finally, within the rural East Market area, we have Lake Pickett, which is currently under a review process. Part of it, the second half of its Lake Pickett South, has gone through transmittal, and it's scheduled for adoption within the next cycle. And just to give you an overall framework of that, over 2,000 acres of the Lake Pickett South, 4,000, just over almost 5,000 dwelling units, and 237,000 square feet of non-residential. That, in a nutshell, Mayor and Mr. Chairman, puts in perspective just a macro analysis of where we're at with market areas and the relevance of the sustainability initiative, as well as the land development code update as presented. Be glad to answer any questions. Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol McGowan.
Good evening. Orange County Public Schools has a dedicated team to plan for our future needs. This is an interdepartmental group known as Advanced Planning, or AP for short. We analyze growth patterns to identify needs in order to provide a capital improvement plan recommendation to our school board. The next several slides will provide an overview of our process. The methodology that AP uses includes analyzing growth, development, capacity of our current buildings, defining and prioritizing our projects, and of course, allocation of funds. This slide shows a comparison between our estimates on students and the State Department, State of Florida. It's called the COFD, or the Capital Outlay Full-Time Equivalency. And this is the way that the state looks to see how many students they anticipate will be in our buildings. And for the past 5 years, if you look at the chart, you can see that the Orange County, well, I hope you can see on the chart, the Orange County projections are more accurate about the number of students that have turned up in our schools than what the state anticipated and projected. We're happy to say that this year, their projection matches ours. We thought it would be nice to take a quick look to build on what you've already seen about the difference between the total COs versus the building permits over the last 10 years. And you can see back in 2006, it was a very active market. And then you got the 2009, and it was not very active. And we are building back up and will surpass where we were in 2006. We do enrollment projections so that we have an idea of how many students will be with us each given year. Each year, we do a budgetary projection for our schools, and we also develop a year-by-year projection for the next 10 years. To develop our projections, our demographer looks at 3 different areas. We look at the births, new residential construction, and what we call the cohort survival. And cohort survival is basically how many students is anticipated to move from one grade level to the next grade level. So between the 3, we come up with our projections. Our birth data comes from the State of Florida Department of Health and from the U.S. Census Bureau. The residential construction data comes with our coordination between our planners and the various governmental agencies. Let's look at the natural growth or the birth rate over the last 5 years. On this map, which is all the elementary school zones in Orange County, the area in white is your boundary lines for a school zone, just so you have a reference. The areas in the darker blue are areas where in the last 5 years, the birth rate has decreased over 25%. And this area that's in the orange, the dark orange, is areas where the birth rate has increased over 25%. So this would represent natural growth due to birth rates, not development. Our next, let's put in the development. This is all the known new development coming into the county and where it's located. And the black lines are the outlines of the project. This residential growth in these black line areas are anywhere size of developments from 10 to 9,000. As you can see, the need for new capacity for our schools comes from 2 areas. Naturally, the birth rate and residential development. As we determine, how do we determine when and where we want a school site and when it should open? We go through a series of events to look at things. The map in front of you is a series of elementary school zones on the west side of the county. The red lines are the current school zones. Those little individual boxes are study areas, and they have a number such as 1363 or 1301. They allow us to drill down to a small area to take a look at how many students currently reside there and how many we anticipate for any growth in the area. This next slide takes the same area and it breaks it down, and your chart shows you the study area. And if you look at 1302, and then you find it on the chart, it tells you the number of existing students as of last May. and the growth that's anticipated, so the total number of students we anticipate in that area. And the black dots on the map represent the current students and where they reside. We come to our next slide, which shows the anticipated growth with the students that we already have. The geographic information system, or the mapping system, allows us to do a visual display to show the anticipated growth and where folks would be in the future. To determine which site to be used, we have a series of factors that we look at, and you can see them on your slide. Each year, we start the process of developing our recommendation for the capital improvement plan by going to a map that we call the build-out map. And the build-out map starts with us for each area, each age level, in this case middle school. This is the current lines. The green represents the boundaries. So for each of these middle schools, we look at certain things. We look at the capacity at the present school. We look at how many students reside in the zone who are under the OCPS umbrella, meaning that they are at a traditional school, a charter school, home school, any of the things that's under our umbrella. And then we also have the estimated number of students through growth. We can look at a specific school site, and this is in the Lake Nona Middle School. And as you can see, the capacity for the school that is there now is 1,235. There are 1,702 students that reside in the area. There's an anticipated growth of 3,587, and that would be a total of 5,289 students at build-out. So we need an additional 3 schools, about 3 1/3 schools. We do this for elementary, middle, and high school. We then look for a visual display for high school, middle school, and elementary schools on where we think we need the next schools. If we start with the high school, the areas that are shaded show you, the darker red shows that we need 2 to 3 schools. The purple areas, we need 1 school. The orange, we need 2 schools. The one with the question mark in it at the top is one that we're keeping a close eye on to see what happens with infrastructure and residential development in the future. But it is an area we could need a school, so we are keeping a close tab on that area. All the circles represent where we believe what area we need a new school. As you see in this one, it is 5 to 6 high schools for build out. And this is our list. The first part tells you the ones that we have in our 10-year capital improvement plan, and then the other ones are outside our 10 years. We do the same thing for middle school. And on our middle school and elementary, we do show our new K-8s that are coming online. And we anticipate for the middle school that we need 16 additional schools by build out. And again, the dark blue rings show the schools that we have in our 10-year capital improvement plan. And the question marks we're watching it closely. So here's our list of schools in our 10-year. And then outside the 10-year. And once again, for elementary, we have our areas of need. And for elementary, it's anticipated we need an additional 18 elementary schools. And this is the list of schools for our 10-year and our 10-year capital improvement plan and the ones that are outside. Speaking of the capital improvement plan, here is our 5-year needs in our CIP and the anticipated year that the school will open. And this is for the next 5 years. And then we took the nice slide for the population projection that the county provided us, and then we overlaid our development layer so that we can see where we're growing. Chris.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan. So the next part of the agenda, we're going to now dive into the school siting ordinance and existing school siting regulations. And so we'll kind of walk you through the existing ordinance, and then items of consensus, and then items that need further discussion. So I did want to start with a little bit of background in terms of where school siting came from. During the 1995 legislature, they did add some mandates that related to school planning. There was a lot of concerns from jurisdictions that were having difficulty getting schools approved. Some jurisdictions required a conditional use for every school. And then there was a lot of discussion about school sites moving into the periphery of development, into more rural areas, because land was cheaper, and then that would actually draw development toward that area that may not be the right place for development. So I think the state decided that we should take a different look and be a little bit more stringent in terms of how we dealt with schools. And so they specifically required that we amend our future land use map and identify land use categories where public schools are an allowable use. In 1996, we developed the school siting ordinance in conjunction with the school board staff, and that was adopted again in 96. And in 1997 was the optional school facilities element was adopted, and that's where the policy that drives this particular meeting is located. In terms of some additional background, and so that you'll understand how the land use correlation table works, that we'll get to in another slide or two. Orange County does have an urban service area, and we encourage compact development, so that we want the development to occur within that urban service area where you have services and infrastructure available. Rural settlements are intended for less intense uses. These are outside the urban service area, and to reflect historic land use patterns that were there before the 1985 Growth Management Act. And the rural service area is the area that's for agricultural uses and the maximum density of 1 unit per 10 acres. And those are areas outside the urban service area, but they're not located within a rural settlement. And then these policies in the future land use element dictate where schools are an allowable use or a special exception. And they kind of follow the logic of the background and the basic framework of the comprehensive plan. So here's the table that's included in the school siting ordinance, and I know it's difficult to read. So on the left-hand side are the three types, the school types. The next row is either in the urban service area, a rural settlement, or the rural service area. And then to the next column, it says it's either by right or in the next column, it's by special exception. So as you can see in the urban service area where we want development to occur, if you're an elementary school in all those residential categories, R1A, R1 AAA, Quad A, RCE, et cetera, a elementary school is permitted by right. It doesn't require anything by the county to approve that particular project. Then if you move into the rural settlement, again, an area where we didn't necessarily want as much development to occur, the elementary schools are then a special exception in those residential zoning categories. And then the elementary schools are not permitted in the non-residential categories today, commercial, industrial, et cetera, because the elementary schools were meant to be in residential areas and create the focus of residential development. And then middle schools, again, the same typology. Urban service area, all those zoning districts, they are a permitted use. You move into the rural settlement, they become special exceptions under the same categories. And then in the rural service area, you're really not allowed unless you're there already in a PD. And then high schools are not allowed in the residential zoning districts. As you can see, they're allowed by right in the urban service area and commercial, industrial, and PD classifications. Rural settlements, again, special exception for high schools. And in the rural service area, it's not on the matrix here that's in the siting ordinance, but in the comprehensive plan, it says that if you need, for whatever reason, you do need a high school or a school in the rural service area, you have to do a comprehensive plan amendment. So you actually go a different step in doing a comp plan amendment, and then either a special exception or by right. And ironically, before 1996, because I think there's a lot of discussion about the number of safe harbors where schools are permitted by right, Before 1996, public schools were a special exception in every category except agriculture, which doesn't make any sense because agricultural zoning is typically in the rural service area. So you can see there was a disconnect between how we did school planning before 1996 and 97. So I think that that's just kind of a background, and that the comprehensive plan basically has the same matrix, but it relates to the land use categories. So if we want to amend this particular matrix, we also have to go back and amend the comprehensive plan to change whether things are permitted or by special exception. And so then I just want to walk through the existing ordinance briefly. And again, you have a copy in front of you. The first section, and again, it's very linear here in terms of presentation. We took each section as you come to them in the ordinance, and we'll just talk briefly about them. Section 1752, this basically was just a grandfathering statement that said whatever school sites the school board owned before 1996, they basically didn't need any additional improvements, and they could add portables, and they could expand those sites to a limit of 5%. And then the typology that's in the ordinance is we have guidelines, criteria, and standards, and we're not proposing any changes to these. These are just basically the standards that each of the following categories are under. The guidelines are not mandatory. The criteria relate to the conditions on the site that impact the site, and then standards relate to the specific design and layout of a particular school. The next section is more of a good planning section. It just says that where you should locate schools, you want to reduce the home to school transportation demands. You want to put elementary schools on local roads. You want to put high schools on roads that have more capacity. You want to avoid certain land use areas, such as being under high voltage transmission lines. The next section is really kind of the NIMBY section. This is a section that says where schools shouldn't be located, and they're pretty obvious within certain distances of certain infrastructure. Probably Commissioner Thompson would say they need to be further than a quarter mile from an active landfill. And then on roads identified as hazardous and next to certain optic lines and in the vicinity of residential property with noise exceeding 60 decibels. One of the issues that came up in School Board Member Cato's district is the fact that we need to have a reciprocal provision in our code for the last item, because we're saying schools shouldn't be located next to a use that has that kind of a sound production, such as a rock crushing plant. But we need to put in our code that says once the school's there, don't put that use next to a school. Right now it talks about that in the ordinance, in the comp plan, but we haven't actually put that in the ordinance, and that's something that we need to do in a different section unrelated to the school siting section. And then this is the next section, 1755. This actually is where we talk about the size of the schools. As you can see that where we are, and again, these were sizes that were recommended by the school board at the time, so that you have elementary schools are 15, 25 for middle schools, ninth grade centers 20 acres, and then 65 for high schools. As you can see, we're a little dated because we didn't have any references to K-8 back in 1996, and then there are some bonuses. If you go multi-story, there's a 10% reduction in that acreage amount if you're doing a multi-story school. The heights are 35 for the lower schools, and then 50 feet for a high school if you're a certain distance from residential development. Then your setbacks are kind of a moving target, because the setbacks are based on whatever particular zoning category the school is located. So if you're in a PD, it might be 25 feet. If you're in a commercial zone, it might be 30 feet. So it's kind of a moving target, but that's the way it's set up currently. And then you follow the landscape buffer requirements in our code when you have parking areas and access areas next to public right-of-way. And then we have some more feel-good joint planning language that's in there. It talks about how we should coordinate, particularly on parks and community centers. And we're not recommending any changes to this particular section. Section 1757 talks about the coordination between the planning, the county planning and the school board planning in terms of how we provide data and information. And it delineates which committees we should have reciprocal membership on, such as the school board's an ex officio member of the DRC, and that our park staff would be on different committees of the school board based on the particular subject that they're dealing with. And then the next section deals with the process for reviewing school sites before they are purchased. It talks about how we go about the consistency determination. And then lastly, there's a requirement that before they submit a consistency determination, there's a community meeting. And the community meeting distance is specifically 300 feet. And that was actually a specific amendment to the ordinance in 1996 that they added the 300-foot minimum requirement for that community meeting. And again, that's a number that's a little dated under our current process, and we'll talk about that later on. And then lastly, the reservation of school sites, which we don't get a lot of now, basically says when a site is reserved based on our subdivision regulations, that has to meet the school site standards. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fernandez. Or Woody, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, members of our board. Before I start, I just want to commend the Orange County staff. We've had a great working relationship over the years, in spite of any of the litigation that was ongoing throughout that period of time. Mr. Testament, Joel Princell, the team that you've assembled over there is certainly one that we feel very comfortable being able to share ideas, and while we may not always be in agreement, at least we can discuss those collegially. And one of the things I would like to point out, as we presented this to our board a few weeks ago, these were the recommendations by our staff and their staff, because we've had the benefit of having to work through it. Some of these may have been brought about from years ago. I think an initial earlier drafts of the proposed changes may have been as far back as 4 or 5 years ago. So there's a lot of concepts, and as you just went through the process, you saw that there's a lot of details, and the devil is always in the detail and trying to work those things out. So we're trying to present you, initially at least, some of the general consensus modifications that staff is recommending, but ultimately we know and we're aware that it's your boards that will make the ultimate say. It's your boards that will take public input and give us that feedback and then tell us how to administer the ordinance. So with that, let me start with 1751, and I don't know if it's more convenient for you can look at the PowerPoint, but you can also follow along in your copy of the ordinance. On the front page of 1751, Ms. Fernandez will talk about the chart, and that's not one area that we have general consensus, because as a school district we have certain requests with regard to special exception. But on page 2 of 1751, subparagraph C, it talks about school buses and where they can be stored. So currently you can have up to 75 buses on a high school. We think there should be no change on that. For middle schools, freestanding ninth grade centers, and K-8s, however, there's a current requirement that we go through a special exception. We're asking for and have had conversations with the county about just having up to 30 buses permitted. We think that's a fair number. And then in elementary schools, no requirement, no permission to have those currently stored on there. That would still be the same, so really no changes there. We would also request a change in terms of bus depots and fueling pumps, and that would now be addressed in the citing ordinance, which right now is silent as to those types of facility uses that we need. Next, under 1752, as Chris alluded to, 1996, the Macarena was very popular. I want to say the Gators hadn't won their first national championship, but they were on their way. And, well, it's been a long time. So we need to update the policy, the ordinance, obviously, to reflect whenever this policy gets adopted. We would also include in this very initial provision, no high schools in rural settlements. That was a commitment from the school board already codified in a resolution that's been adopted. It's been the commitment of, I think, both boards to make sure that situation doesn't arise again. And so that would be contained in 1752. And if you think of the guidelines as sort of being your constitution and then your criteria, your statutes, your standards, your more detailed rules, you want to have that at least in the higher principles in terms of something that would be a little bit more difficult to overcome. And then finally, for renovations on existing schools, we currently have a 5% cap. It's a school board's request that that cap go away, or at least be modified significantly. And that's an area that we have consensus that it should be modified, whether it gets eliminated completely or modified to a different number. That's one of those details that still needs to be worked out. Next, under 1753, bottom of page 3, you have the school site guidelines. We have a provision there stating that the schools should be located where there's adequate public facilities and infrastructure. I think that's commonsensical, but it would be reinforcing that which we're already doing in practice. And then a provision stating that if practical, we're going to have access to walkability of schools. So again, concepts that I think both boards could support and get behind. 1754, here you have a few more changes, a couple of slides. First and foremost, as it pertains to elementary schools, we would want to put those on local streets or collector streets. And again, this would be as practical as possible, but we would provide that as part of one of the criteria that we would be looking at when we're looking at site location. There is a provision currently that we are not to have a school adjacent to a water treatment plant. Because that process has changed substantially over the last 15, 20 years, we think that that restriction no longer needs to be applicable. Adding a provision stating that school sites may not be located within a quarter mile of a hazardous waste facility, that's something that we think should be added. It may, again, impose a limitation on the school board to find a different location, but at the end of the day, if we put a school close to a hazardous waste facility, you would probably get public uproar anyway, so doesn't make good business sense to do that. Still under 1754, on page 5, we have some elimination of restriction regarding telephone fiber optics lines. We think that's probably a good restriction to eliminate. And then adding restrictions about hazardous industrial uses or industrial chemical plants, avoiding schools next to or adjacent within 1,500 feet, I should say, of an adult entertainment establishment. Also another restriction that should be codified in the ordinance. We did discuss, by the way, restrictions on alcoholic beverage establishments. And from a school board's perspective, it does limit substantially because of the variety of different licenses that are available. So while once we put a school in a location, there is a zone in which you are insulated from having those establishments come on board afterwards unless there's a waiver. We did think if we put that restriction on ourselves, that may also impair or limit some of the potential locations that we could approach about acquiring property. 1755 are your site standards, and that starts on page 4 and leads into page 5 of the current ordinance. The acreage sizes, so your current model has, for example, 15 acres for an elementary school, and then if you do stormwater retention that is allows for the exfiltration system, for example, you get to knock off a couple acres. If you do a joint use, you get to knock off a couple more acres. We thought the process should be somewhat reversed, and that is, tell us what an ideal school looks like with the best of all possible stormwater, the best of joint use facilities and so forth, and what is the minimum number of acres we need to have? And then if we don't have those criteria, we don't have those standards, then you add on acres. And the difference is, from a layperson's perspective who comes to the county commission to look at your decision, we don't want them to think that you're granting us exceptions and giving us a break and reducing the acreage when in reality we're doing exactly what the code says it does. So you would be adding on instead of subtracting. I know it's a matter of perception, but that sometimes can be a very critical issue for the public in how they interpret it. Our goal is just to identify what does it look like, best case scenario, if we did all the things you asked for, and what is the minimum acreage we would need to have. We don't have agreement yet on those acreage, so if you're in the Board of County Commissioners, their staff is still looking at our numbers, our proposed numbers, but these are numbers that are taken from our facilities folks, and they tell us this is a minimum number we absolutely need to have for an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school. Building heights, as you see in the current language at the bottom of page 4, we have 35 feet for elementary, middle, and high schools from we would ask that be changed from 35 to 40. And then if it's beyond 100 feet for a high school, we would ask that it be changed the heights from 50 to 60. So subtle changes, but to allow for additional architectural features or what have you that might necessarily allow us to go a little bit higher up and provide less use of acreage in the neighborhood. The building setbacks we think should be as prescribed by the Florida Building Code, and the driveways and parking areas likewise based on applicable state standards. There's very little reason to think that we need to recreate those codes in the ordinance. but certainly applying a standard that we can be held to that would be prudent and observed by other municipalities and other counties. Still on 1755, traffic studies to be required pursuant to Florida statutes. And then if the entrance to the school location requires a signal, that the school board would be responsible for those costs as well as any lanes or entrances. That's something that's been our practice in the past. But then also for the county to consider, not necessarily to be imposed, if there's additional signals that needed to be required as a result of that study signal, that study report, then that would be something for the county commission to consider. Landscape buffers, again, maintaining standards that would be establishing standards and maintaining those standards, but if there was additional requirements, finding a third party to absorb those costs as opposed to the school board, or perhaps having the county contribute some of the costs related to those additional landscaping requirements. The last one on this slide is a provision regarding airport runways. This is pretty self-explanatory. I think it comes from statutes, but there is a limitation on 5 miles of an airport runway and the direct line of sight from that, so we already abide by that. It just needs to be included in the ordinance to preserve that. Additional standards to consider would be outdoor lighting and setting specific standards for that. We don't have quite an agreement on what those standards would be. I would say along those same lines, we probably should consider some type of standard for signage, whether it's electronic or otherwise, and where you can have it, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high schools. The electronic signage is something that we take great advantage of, particularly in our high schools, because of the number of different signs and different messages you want to communicate to your community. Establishing standards for queuing, again, not addressed in any of the state standards, but we think that one that the board would be receptive to. If we've got a standard for the number of parking spaces, why not have a standard that we can agree upon as to the number of cars that should be located on site? And the last two, still under some discussion, but there currently are, we would like to address the mitigation for minor environmental impacts. And under the Orange County Code, when a property is first, before it gets through the development process, it has to, well, there's differences of opinion, legal opinions, as to whether or not the tree mitigation requirements in the code are applicable to the school district. So we would like to just make sure that we are consistent with this process going forward. We know that once we've acquired the site and have built the school, there is no going back to the county and saying we'd like to remove trees or mitigate trees. But certainly in that pre-development stage, there seems to be some discussion about whether or not those provisions are applicable. We would just like to make sure that the school ordinance addresses this at the outset and provides Orange County School Board the opportunity to move forward without those requirements. Under 1757, we have coordination of planning. As I just mentioned at the outset, we have great coordination currently between the staffs, but we would want to clarify the roles and more specifically put forth that they are members of certain boards, our advanced planning team, that we've got them as ex officio members and participants in our process and likewise in response. And then there are a series of reporting requirements. I'm sure they were well intended in 1996. Since then, I think they do more than that and different reporting, but those reporting requirements don't necessarily add to the function of good governance. What they do is they create additional reporting requirements. But I will say that our staffs do a great job. We provide information to them and they provide information to us that is not in the ordinance, but certainly meets or exceeds those reporting requirements. So having those in the ordinance, we did not think was a good governance, let's put it that way. 1758, Ms. Fernandez will address, because that is at the heart of one of the major issues on how we get consistency. But 1759 is an easy one, again, that everyone can get behind. Currently, there's a requirement for 300 feet. That's already practice of 1,500 feet. We would also want the list of those that are invited to be expanded to the mayor, the Board of County Commissioners, and I think Ms. Gordon at our work session had added that we should also include representatives of different municipalities, particularly if they're adjacent to or might have interested individuals. And then also the last requirement is to change it from advertising in the newspaper to that of other options, including websites. The newspaper advertisements sometimes get lost, they're expensive, they don't necessarily function in the same way they did back 20 years ago. 1760 is almost a cut and replace. It's a very short section, as you'll notice at the last page, And we would request that we would add our current real estate standards, which they may be a couple of pages in length, but they do codify what our current practices are for acquiring real estate. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Ms. Fernandez, who's got some of the concepts that we didn't reach consensus on, but we'd like to share with you.
Good evening. The next few slides that I will be presenting really do present some significant changes to the current process. And so it'll be a lot of information to kind of take in. To start with, if you recall, you have a different table currently contained in the school siting ordinance. This is the table that we would be initially proposing. If you can take a look at the different categories of the table, specifically the area that we have eliminated is getting rid of the special exception process altogether. We currently have in place, if you recall, Mr. Testerman talking about a consistency determination. That consistency determination is contained within the Florida statutes. What we would be proposing would be a consistency determination process where it would be a binding process rather than going through the special exception process. So to start off with, we would be looking at Section 38-1758, which is the section that talks about reviewing of public school sites. I do want to point out that our staff has based our proposals on the Hillsborough County model. This is what's currently used in the Hillsborough County. And county staff has looked at Manatee County as well, which has a similar process, except that they do not have a hearing officer. Instead, these determinations are actually made by their commission and staff. So to start with, what we would be looking at is having a concept of having a pre-submittal conference. This conference would have to take place at least 15 days, but not more than 120 days prior to the pre-acquisition notice, which I'll go over in just a few minutes. The purpose of this meeting would be for our respective staffs to sit down together and look at the various sites that we would be looking at. And to identify any issues with these proposed sites. So ostensibly what we could be looking at is, say our real estate department is looking at potentially 6 different sites to locate an elementary school. We would come to a pre-submittal conference with your staff and we would go over those specific sites, 6 different sites, and we would point out what concerns or issues would be raised with those particular sites. The next step of the process is where we would actually file or forward to you a pre-acquisition notice. I do want to point out that this entire process that I'm going through right now, because we would be getting rid of the special exception process, hopefully, we would do all of this prior to acquiring any property. So we would not be facing the situations what we have faced in the last couple of years where we have already acquired a piece of property and now we're going through the land entitlement process. This would all get done very early on prior to acquisition of the property. In addition to that, we would also be providing a lot more detailed information to county staff to be able to make the recommendations that we would be requesting. So during the pre-acquisition notice phase, this would occur at least 60 days prior to acquiring or leasing a piece of property. And we would send what's called a consistency determination to the county. That consistency determination would need to determine whether or not the piece of property that we're looking at has the appropriate zoning to be consistent with your comp plan, and then also, because we would be presenting more detailed information, you would actually see something more of a conceptual site plan where you would be able to see a lot more of the detail of what you see now when we go through the land entitlement process. And so we would be looking to your staff to also make a recommendation of consistency with the public school siting regulations. We do have some time in some of the areas that you'll see in some of the phases. We have put in a time period. Those are obviously not set in stone. We would be happy to have further discussions on those. And then on some of the other phases, you'll see where it says TBD because we just don't know what that timing requirement would be. But the next step is we would have, obviously, hopefully the recommendations of staff and of your Planning and Zoning Commission with regards to consistency with the comprehensive plan as well as consistency with the school siting regulations. The next step would be to have your county administrator contact a hearing officer to actually have a formal public hearing on the 2 recommendations of consistency that we would be receiving from your planning staff as well as your Planning and Zoning Commission. During this hearing, the hearing officer would be able to listen to testimony. It would be very similar to the public hearings, the quasi-judicial public hearings that you currently hold. But rather than having it before your whole commission, it would be that particular hearing officer that would hold that hearing and would take evidence and testimony. The hearing officer would then issue findings of facts and conclusions of law within a certain amount of time after that public hearing is held. The hearing officer would be able to impose reasonable conditions, as you are currently able to do as well, and those conditions would be subject to what's contained under 1013.51, which is currently what you are able to do as well. Within a certain amount of time of receiving the hearing officer's determinations, Orange County Public Schools would also hold a legally advertised public hearing where Orange County Public Schools would make a determination as to whether or not to accept the conclusions of law presented by the hearing officer or whether or not we would be appealing those findings of facts and conclusions of law. Within a certain amount of time, again, to be determined after the hearing officer issues his or her determinations, either Orange County Public Schools, after holding its legally advertised public hearing, or an aggrieved party would be able to appeal the decisions and the conclusions of law that have been reached by the hearing officer. If you have a situation where either Orange County Public Schools or an aggrieved party decides to appeal the decisions or recommendations that are made by the hearing officer, at that point, your Board of County Commissioners would hold another public hearing where it would review the hearing officer's decisions. And within that portion of the phase, what you would be looking at is not so much as the findings of facts, but more at the conclusions of law. And your review would be a little bit different than what it currently is. The next step would be that obviously there may be opposition from your own board as to what the determination is by the specific hearing officer. And so it would take a majority of your board to vote to appeal the decision of the hearing officer as well. In the event that you were to appeal whatever decisions or recommendations have been made by the hearing officer, then at that point you would have another hearing as well. And that hearing would be held, again, you would have a little bit different standard of review than what you currently have, but you would obviously be able to have a hearing to hear the facts and everything that has been submitted as far as evidence with regards to the hearing officer's determinations. Once that process is complete, that determination, whether it's sanctioned by the Board of County Commissioners or if it's something that nobody appeals and you agree with everything that has been determined by the hearing officer, that would be a binding decision. So that, again, all of this portion of it would be done prior to the acquisition of the property. So once we were able to get the go-ahead and say perfect world, we had a great public hearing, we had great conditions that were imposed, we have nothing to appeal, that would be a binding decision. And so therefore, the next step for us would be just to simply submit a development plan as we currently do. Obviously, right now, we only submit that development plan during PD, but we would be willing to submit that development plan for all of our projects for the county to review. And in that point, you would have something similar to what you currently have with DRC, which is that the DRC would review that development plan to make sure that we are complying with everything that was contained in the hearing officer's reports or whatever determinations were made by the Board of County Commissioners if that decision had been appealed. And that would occur within 45 days of submittal of the development plan. Does anybody have any questions on that particular process at this point? Okay. The next portion that that I would be presenting would just be to touch a little bit on charter schools. I know this has been a hot topic issue as of late. The one change that we would be proposing as staff is to have something within the school siting ordinance that addresses charter schools that is similar to what is in currently contained under Florida Statutes 1002.33, which is just treating both public schools, your everyday customary public schools and charter schools in an equitable fashion. And I'm going to switch it over to Mr. Testament for the next steps.
Thank you, Ms. Fernandez, and we are down to the home stretch, the last slide. So where we are today, and I know it's a lot of information to digest. So the next steps would be to continue to have discussions, as Mr. Rodriguez said, with our respective staffs to develop and present these changes to the board. I think, as we indicated, some of these changes to the code also require comprehensive plan amendments, and that has a distinct process that has to go through. And then once hopefully there's a concurrency on the actual ordinance that goes forward, we probably would not take an ordinance forward unless there was concurrence by the staff and the board. It gave us a resolution saying they support the changes. But then at that point, we would take the school siting ordinance through the number of public hearings that are required in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission and in front of the Board of County Commissioners. And we welcome any other methods that may be recommended in terms of how we vet the ordinance with the community and with the interests that are out there. So with that, all of us are here to respond to any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chesterman, and staff, again, thank you. As I think the audience can tell, this has been many, many, many months of work that has gone to bringing us to this point. Board members and commissioners, I want to thank you. I failed to state at the beginning of the meeting, but that we were going to hold our questions till after the presentation, so thank you for that. Before I go to questions or comments, indulge me if you would. Dr. Jenkins, our superintendent of schools, is down there somewhere. Can't see, okay. Dr. Jenkins, do you have anything to add? And after Dr. Jenkins, Mr. Lachlandani, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Mr. Lachlandani?
She's speaking for me also.
Okay. What I thought I'd do is thank you, Mr. Lachlandani. She speaks for me quite often, so I understand. I'm going to go to Mayor Jacobs, and then I've got myself, and then just raise your hand if you want to queue up, and I'll start a list, okay?
Okay, one of the questions. Yes, one of the questions that I had to do with the idea of reducing the school acreage. And Mr. Rodriguez, you mentioned that, and I appreciate the sensitivity to the fact that if we reduce it to have kind of the bare footprint of the school, that in some ways I think puts this board in a little more comfortable light, so that it doesn't look as if we are, I don't know the term you used for it. You used a better term than I'm about to use. So that it's clear that we're upholding the intent of the size. And I got that. The concern I have is on the flip side of it. If it's, say, it's 10 acres for an elementary school, I think that was the minimum size, and that's without the proper retaining pond, and so we want to add 2 acres. I'm concerned about being in a situation in the future. We have a room full of people who feel they desperately need the school, but we have adjacent homeowners that we're concerned may be flooded by the school, and this is where that slightly different role comes into place, because our board's role is about balancing property rights between you all as a property owner and the adjacent property owners. So I think that the idea has merit. I just think that we need to work through a little bit more clearly how we would identify jointly that more land is needed, so we don't find ourselves in that situation that we found ourselves in, I think, with Avalon, where we were really battling. We had our technical experts battling, and And I think no matter whether we had the school oversized, undersized, I think either way, we run into a problem if we can't find a way of establishing those standards. And maybe that's impossible, but that's one of the things that I would ask our staffs to work together on. If we're going to come up with a smaller footprint, let's be clear about what is and isn't contained in that size, so that it doesn't look quite so subjective when it's coming to our board. Is that making some sense? Okay, thank you.
And let me follow up on that for the edification of the county commission. There's really, I think, still hanging out there three big issues to the school board that are of great importance to us. One is the acreage requirement. It's as we become a more heavily urbanized county, it is becoming increasingly difficult for us to acquire the land we need to build our schools. For example, and this is a concrete example, we are looking to acquire land right now to relieve Dr. Phillips High School, and the cheapest land we have been able to find 65 acres at to meet our needs is at $500,000 an acre. Now put that in perspective, that's $32.5 million just in land acquisition costs. So the acreage issue, Mayor, you raised some great points. I don't know what the solution is to it, but we really hope that we can find some way to allow us to build, at least in urban core areas, schools on less acreage. We have a whole number of schools, as you all well know as county commissioners, that are currently sited on less than the 65-acre requirement for high schools or less than the 25-acre requirement for middle schools. But one brainstorm that I've thrown out, and it's preliminary and staff hasn't vetted it yet, is perhaps we need to look at some type of a population density sliding scale, where if we have a density of so many people per square mile, allows us to build a school on a smaller acreage footprint, which would allow us in an urban core area with high densities of population to build schools on smaller footprints than we currently have. The other issue, I think, I want the Commission to know that it's becoming increasingly important to us, and it's a thorny issue, and we recognize it as charter schools. And do charter schools have to abide by the same requirements? We're actually perceived, I believe, as a very friendly school district to charter schools. We have 36 of them currently. We just permitted 3 more. I don't think anybody on our board wants to impose the same requirements on a charter school that's opening up, say, for 400 students, 300 students, 200 students, and that's a lot of our charter schools, to be honest. But we are increasingly getting charter schools that are opening up for 1,200 students, 1,400 students. We have one charter school right now that is seeking approval, may have already gotten it, I'm not sure where they're at in the process. They're looking to put a 1,400 student school on, I believe, a 6-acre parcel. So that pains us because, you know, we just think it should be a two-way street. The last issue that's very, very important to us, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms.
I will say on that, I agree with you. I think to the extent that we're looking at apples to apples when it comes to school size and type, that I would agree, and I think that the board would generally agree that we would want you all to be treated equally.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the third and final issue still hanging out there, and it's one that you can tell our staff spent quite a bit of time on, is how do we get certitude earlier in the process? And now what we have proposed, I don't think anybody on our board is locked into it, but the downside of what we have proposed is it probably will increase our land acquisition costs because we'll have to do more option contracting. It will also add greater timelines or time restraints to our process because we will be forced to seek review earlier and get that review at the outset when we acquire property from the county. But what's in it for us is it allows us to get some certainty if we acquire a parcel of property that we're not going to build on, say, for 8, 10 years. And we're trying to do more and more. I want this county commission to know this. We are trying mightily to do more and more land banking. We've always land banked to a certain extent. A good concrete example of that is we've owned the Wedgefield property for years. We've owned the Seidel Road property for a number of years. We all know, unfortunately, how long we had owned the West Orange Relief property. We're trying to do more of that, but we need to figure out a way to avoid conflict going forward to get some certainty as to whether we can build on that site. So what we have proposed is being done, I believe, by Hillsborough. Manatee, I believe, has a different process, but it's becoming more and more commonplace for especially urbanized counties to have some type of preliminary approval process early on. So those are the 3 big issues hanging out there still that are important to the board and that we hope to keep the conversation going and work through. I've got Ms. Gordon queued up, then Ms. Gould, and then Commissioner Boyd, did you, or was that? Okay. And board members, if you could show our county commission brethren how we punch our buttons, and that way, I'll just sort of look down the line and you can tell me who punched it or who's queued up. Mrs. Gordon. One last thing, these mics are live if the red light's on. You have to push hard. We've all learned. They're new to us as well, and they're not very flexible. So try to remember to push it off. They pick up every whisper, so if you leave it on, it's going to pick up your conversation for the audience. Mrs. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to just say thank you for a very difficult subject. Many subjects that you've covered, and you've covered them extraordinarily. I think that it is just wonderful. And you made them simple, believe it or not. A lot of time has gone into this in many years. I'm glad that it did come up. I did have the same concern that the chair and the mayor had in reference to the charter school. But my question is, and some of them I'll just have to meet with legal counsel and Dr. McGowan to get additional answer, because I have other concerns here, but I'll just address a few of them. I wanted to know, when we look at the 38-1761 with the charter school, would we not be conflicting with the state who, as you know, telling them what to do? Education has been telling them they have the same requirements as public school in that realm. So how are we going to be able to tell them to come up with the same requirement in public schools as with the citing ordinance? I know maybe because the county's in charge of it, but can they come back in a suit of some kind personally? So that's one question, okay? And because I don't want to project anything on them. We are not their board, and we do not oversee them. We only approve them if they make qualification, if they qualify by the state. But if we as a board feel that it doesn't look for a good qualification, then we let them know that, and then we voice our opinion. So I don't want the two boards to conflict as we going out telling them what to do, but they are in the county. So that's a major concern for me legally. The next thing that I'm concerned about is 38-1754, where we talk about the hazardous waste. We have built schools in areas where you said you're adding provisions stating school sites may not be located within 1/4 mile of hazardous waste facilities. But I don't have the book before me that General Counsel alluded to. I would like them spelled out. What do you consider hazardous? Because we have to go to the state and fight walking hazardous. So what will the county be using? So when we do go to the county to make note of it, what will the county consider hazardous? And what will this great staff that have been working together with the mayor's office and the superintendent's office, what will you come up with listing what is considered hazardous waste facility? Because I can point out in several districts where there are, to me, hazardous waste facilities next to several of our schools. That's one. That's another one. And then the next one is 38-1754, where I have a concern on the adult entertainment. Is there a reason why you did not? Are you considering adult entertainment, the bars and the little houses that they have? You know, they got those little houses now. I don't want to tell you what they call them, because in different neighborhoods, they're called different things. So I would like the county, you look into that. What about that type of entertainment, and are the bars and the alcoholic beverage places included? Because I do know we have a stipulation that you cannot build a school within, but are you going to put these demands, these citings into the regulation? And I do feel if you leave them out, then there will be no challenge. We could not fight it. I could not fight it within my area, because, or any area within the county that I may want to fight for, this board wants to fight for. So that's it. I am concerned about equality, and I'm concerned about equity. And I do believe, I thank you for making some recommendation on 381755 as site standards, but I'm concerned about a high school being able on 45 acres. I just have a major problem with that. So if we put a high school on 45 acres, I'm sure that the enrollment would not be like Dr. Phillips or Olympia or whatever. So then where is it where we put for the county in their site standards what our standard would be if we placed a school on 45 acres, let alone the 15 acres for a middle or ninth grade center. So I just have a little problem with that. And then I would want you to be fair and keep it fair. If you're going to do it in one neighborhood, my word on this board has been since I've been here, then it ought to be in the other neighborhood and not letting, because businesses have friendship, then they slide and they let those businesses get approved to put what they want to put or to cut back based on what neighborhood it is in. So this is something that needs to be stated regardless of district, or county, or neighborhood. Well, it's one county, but you have 13 municipalities and unincorporated Orange that you are working within. So I do feel that that would be something that we need to look into. And then the 1755 to 38 on the outdoor lighting, it is very important that we create a standard for outdoor lighting, because some schools will be in the light, some schools will be in the dark. Some schools want to be in the dark, but some schools want to be in the light. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me go to Mayor Jacobs. Although I have to say, Mrs. Gordon, I always learn something totally unexpected whenever I'm in a meeting with you. So I'll have to elaborate later after the meeting on your earlier comments. Mayor Jacobs.
I want to go to the school and the light.
Me too.
Let me direct a couple of these questions to our staff, but to clarify, because this has to do with the ordinances, our ordinances have already definitions for hazardous waste. Our ordinances define very clearly where adult entertainment is, what is and isn't. So some of the definitions that you're talking about are defined. I think which will be very helpful is for us to provide those to you, so you know when we say this, if we all agree to this, what does it mean? Because it's going to circle back and tie back into the ordinances we have. Regarding your concern about the 45-acre and what does that mean for a student population, I think that's a great question. And back to Mr. Rodriguez, what I was suggesting as we look at if we're going to have a minimum size, if that minimum size is a minimum size without retention pond facility, or if it is a minimum size for a smaller prototype school, then if we're fairly clear about that, then I think there's a greater chance of that equity that you're talking about. The issue of the charter school requirements, I think that is different because it's the county versus the school board, but I was hoping that we could hear from Mr. Testerman or Mr. Princell regarding whether there's any prohibition does the county have the jurisdiction to set standards for minimum size for charter schools? Can you speak to that? Because I think that was a concern.
So Mayor, I'll let Joel speak to that, but briefly though, just so you know, the way it works in the current code is that charter schools are treated just like private schools in the county. Only the public schools fall under a different section of the code. So charter schools and private schools are special exceptions in every zoning category, unlike the public schools, which are permitted in certain categories, and then they are permitted in some of the commercial
But Mr.
zones.
Testerman, there wouldn't be any reason why whatever standards we come up with for size couldn't be considered as part of that special exception if they're a similar type of school and a similar size that we would expect them to have the same size component.
And I'll need to let Joel defer to Joel, because then we would have a separate set of standards for charter schools than we do for private schools. But because the charter schools have a particular relationship with the school board, that probably is not a problem. But I'll let Mr.
Mr.
Prinsell.
Prinsell, can you address that question? And if you don't have an answer, that's fine too. This is not the end of the process, but.
We have a statute, Mayor, that's about 10, 12 pages long that is in like a 10-point font that deals with charter schools. And there are certain requirements in there. And basically the key is that charter schools have to be treated equitably and not the same necessarily as public schools. But we would have to look into that question further.
Good. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gordon. Commissioner Boyd.
I think I got this on. In the spirit of time, I'm just going to run through some observations that I had and kind of get that out. I'm not really looking, mainly for staff. I can follow back up with them and kind of go through that. In regard to the smaller schools, one of the concerns that we have, and I'll be at Dr. Phillips Elementary School later this week, is that the queuing and off-site issues that we experience, even at our normal size schools that we have now, how do we deal with that? And so the question on the smaller schools, definitely on the transportation component of that, is going to be extremely important. I think that the flexibility of being able to do that is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I will say off-site issues that we as a county commission have to deal with is always a big issue. The other thing on the timeline, I got a question on the timeline. I'd kind of like to know kind of how this process is going to lay itself out over the course of the next year or two, or if it's going to be over the next year. I'm not sure, but I would like to get that. Let me see. On the charter schools, one of the interesting things too about charter schools is, with a charter school, when we have an issue, we actually are able to deny them and deal with those issues. And if it doesn't fit in the fabric, I don't know of too many public schools that we've had that actually happen with. On the hearing officer issue, that was a lot of information, obviously, to take in, and definitely want to spend some more time looking at that. I know you all as a school board dealing with the rezonings and some of the things that you all do, I think taking the county commissioners out of that to some extent, I'm not comfortable with that, but I need to learn more about that. And I know that was an issue that Eileen had brought up that was did not have the consensus of your board as well, so I understand that. Let me see. The other thing that I wanted to mention too was, while you had mentioned Dr. Phillips High School and the $500,000 per acre that you all are currently having to deal with down there as well. I know the property wasn't purchased, some years ago, but now we are there today looking at that, and so that is obviously a big issue because at some point there will have to be a relief school for Dr. Phillips. One of the other things that when we start talking about some of our joint uses that we have, many years ago when I had gotten elected to the county commission, down in Hunters Creek, they wanted to have joint use of park facilities or use of fields at the schools. And I don't think we have very many of those today either. And I think there may be a way of the county and the school board working together to maybe find some of those joint uses and help defray some of those costs. It's just some of my thoughts. Right now, currently in Dr. Phillips, I'm looking for Little League space for the Little League for Dr. Phillips. And there was some discussion about how we could do that, but unfortunately the high school is so far down the road, I can't really plan it that way, but yet we're going to look at how maybe that might be possible in the future if we can do some of that. So anyways, that's really it. I think the traffic control with the smaller schools is definitely a big issue. At Dr. Phillips Elementary School, when I go out there this week, I will say that the parents had told me, don't come on a certain day because the sheriff's office will be there, because it actually works and flows very well that day. Come out on another day when they're not there, and you can see how the chaos is that we are, as parents, are having to deal with. And at Sunset Park Elementary School, it's kind of the same thing. I will say that when you all, as a school board, put those law enforcement officers out there, it was like night and day in dealing with the issues over there. So I just want to bring up those points, and it gives me something to kind of go back with the staff and some of the other items that I was, brought to my attention tonight. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyd. Ms. Gould.
I'm going to start from a different perspective, and then I'm going to wrap around to a couple things that Commissioner Boyd pointed out. But one of the things that we had some discussion about was about the advertising and making sure people are very aware when we're looking at school siting. And we had discussed when this was presented to us of expanding some of that call out. Saying websites is not enough. I would like to see some language that is broader about notifications and public information, using all tools at our disposal at that time, because we can't even envision what's going to be available at that time. Who could have envisioned Facebook 10 years ago, and its effect? So I would like to see that in there. Also, we've talked around this, and I know it's not school siting, but I think it's certainly pertinent to the discussions that we're having here for planning purposes, and that is more and more land banking and opportunity as we go into that planning, and getting us involved as elected officials even sooner in the process and looking at those things. Because we have been so crushed in West Orange County with this land banking issue, and then people not being clear on where we have banked land. The walkability and the safety goes to the transportation issue. At Dr. Phillips High School, we extended that carpool line as far as you could possibly extend a carpool line. And one of the challenges we have there, it is in a neighborhood, but it's also in a very busy intersection, and a lot of parents with very small children are concerned about the walkability. So more and more drive, even when they're in that 2-mile zone. So I think as we look at where we put the schools, we're really good about the traffic planning and all of that, but that safety and security, that especially of the elementary school students, and I'm not sure exactly how we would word that because it really is specific to the location, but that's a perfect example of a school that's in the heart of a neighborhood, right next to a Y, but it's got commercial, it's a huge cross street, and we've done everything we can to make it a better carpool. But it's just we have more cars than we should have going there because of fear. So that's part of it. And yes, as a parent, I'll say this, we're not always well behaved when we're not monitored. The other thing that Commissioner Boyd had said that I did not think about fully, but it did cause me some pause when I originally heard it, is about the hearing officer. And how does that really maybe replace our role as elected officials? And should that be a joint elected official meeting versus a hearing officer? And I think I need to also think about that and maybe talk through what does that really look like from a staff perspective versus an elected official perspective, and where is that appropriate? Because I know it still comes to us, we still look at it. But right now, when we're looking at schools and use of schools, we often have those community meetings with our staff rather than a third party having community meetings on our behalf. So that's really where it took my mind when he pointed that out. So those were mine.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. I believe I have Commissioner Clark.
Okay. First off, I want to give kudos to the school board members I work with. I'm in kind of the core. I have Oak Ridge, Colonial, and Boone, so I'm not facing a lot of the issues that the folks out in the other areas are. But where I'm really, really pleased is to move to the K-8s. And there's a solid plan within my district to move to the K-8. So I just want to let you know that I really appreciate these ladies and the other one. Anyway, I work with 3 school board members, but it's really, really good. Some of the issues with the hearing, the Hillsborough model, Now, I wish we'd seen kind of a side-by-side with the Manatee model, whatever that might be, so I don't know what the subtle differences are. But it seems to me that just on the surface is kind of convoluted and may even be more cumbersome and tougher to get something done, because any aggrieved party, that could be any aggrieved party. So I would suspect that most of these would probably come to us anyway, so we might as well just set up a system to, in the table, I think we should recreate a table that's more consistent with what we need over time, but not remove the elected officials from it, and that's on both sides of the aisle, you know, the school board plus us. It removes the public from us. And I see some people in the room that we spend a lot of time with on a couple schools, and I would hate to create a system that removes their voice from the process. I mean, that's why we're all sitting here, is to make sure that we represent them as well as the interest of the entire county. So I would like to, and maybe, Chris, you can kind of share the Manatee model with us. And I don't know if I can understand that one either, but this one was tough enough. But so, yeah, that's a real grave concern of mine, is that when we do this, that we make sure that we keep the elected officials involved, that gives voice to the people who put us in the offices. Charter schools. Now, I've got a really big charter school in my district that probably would fall within what you're talking about, some land use issues. And we work very hard with them to deal with traffic. And we can't turn back the hands of time on that. But I do believe, Mayor, that there needs to be a way for these larger charter schools to really have some criteria that doesn't go in and really kind of denigrate the fabric of a neighborhood. But I guess my question then is, if we require them to meet the same criteria as a school board, are you going to allow them to have access to your CIP funding and your construction funding? Because, you know, they don't, I don't think they have access to it now, or do they? Okay, I mean, that would be my question. If we're going to put the same criteria on them, will they have access to the funding, since they are, in essence, public schools? And that's just something I throw out there as kind of an equity issue. The smaller ones, I was at Lake Eola. I was on the board there for many, many years. Not an issue. You know, we were able to buy our small building, you know, 300 kids, and it worked out very, very fine. You know, we didn't have to worry about acreage. You know, we were like 5 stories high. So different model, but I think that's something we need to keep in the back of our minds. What we require of them, require of us, make sure that it's equitable. And this has been very, very informative for me. I appreciate it. And thank you, guys. Really great presentations.
Let me suggest, Mr. Tessman, rather than us trying to go into detail with the Hillsborough and the Manatee County process, that I think I think they're both complicated enough that we probably need to have a separate board workshop on those. And we would be pleased, you know, we'll send a notice. We'd be pleased to have you all join us in that, but I think we're all going to need to learn more and give a lot of thought to that. I can see where there are advantages. I share some of the same concerns we've heard here, but I think we need to spend more time learning before reaching any kind of conclusions. I don't think we have the time for that here today. So we'll make sure we do that in a very thorough fashion. We'll work together with your staff to make sure we have all the information and we're presenting it in a very fair and objective light, and then have a good discussion and take as much time as we need to make the right decision on that.
Ms. Covert, and then Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to thank our counterparts at the county for coming and doing this. I think that we can really set an example, be a role model, and show precedent for how different government entities can work very well together in the public interest. So thank you, Mr. Clark, for your comments. I know that other partners are doing the same. Mr. Clark and I are talking about having some joint town halls and things like that so that we can get that public input and access for our constituents. So I appreciate that. I appreciate this discussion very much. I do want to talk a little bit about the acreage issues. Here, what I would really ask for is flexibility. I think that we need to be able to be as creative as possible as we become more populated, as we grow exponentially, and we see that infill, especially in our urban core. I just don't want to tie up our hands. We're looking at doing some very innovative things as far as schools in the future, possibly a performing arts school that might be built in our urban core. That certainly is not going to meet this 45-acre minimum. So I just want to make sure that we're not putting any language in here that's going to tie our hands in the future and not allow us to be innovative and creative as we serve the students and the public. So, clauses like no deductions allowed, I would caution against blanket statements like that. If we want to do a performing arts school in the core, if we want to do a tag school, different things like that, let's just allow for common sense and flexibility as we work together in the public interest. In addition, Commissioner Boyd must have read my notes because I made a star next to joint use of facilities. I think we've danced around that. We have a couple of areas that we've done that, but I think we can do that so much better, where we have these beautiful parks or athletic facilities. There's no reason for the public to pay twice or us to have duplication of effort if we might make use of those facilities, or where we are building facilities together, like the stadium out in the West Orange Relief School. Working together, we might be able to make that the best facility possible for the public. So I'd really like to encourage us to do that together as we move forward in planning new schools, see where we have opportunity for that, and that goes back to the flexibility with the acreage. So I'm looking for just common sense and flexibility so that we can work together as we grow. And I just thank you for your efforts in working with us on that.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman Sublette. I echo just about all the sentiments that have been expressed on this board and want to say thank you to everybody for being here, especially the county staff, who I know you've been hard at work late last night and then all day today, because we had a board meeting where they were supporting us at the board meeting as well. I have some initial concerns about the magistrate process, and so I just want to understand that a little bit better. And I had a conversation with School Board Member Flynn this morning, and knew that she wasn't going to be here, but she had asked that I bring up just the idea that we have some challenges that we're working through right now between some of the requirements at the state level for the 2-mile radius for busing, the definition of what is kind of a hazardous or a scary walk for kids and young kids trying to get to school, and then planning between the county, the school board, and then the city of Orlando. And so sometimes the city of Orlando isn't at the table. So Daryl and I are dealing with some issues right now where we're asking small children to cross a 6-lane divided highway and to walk past the school to walk back to the school. And we can't find a loophole in there to get a light or find out who's going to pay for it, or to get them busing, or we just think there could have been better coordination, and we know that there has to be some flexibility. So Daryl asked that I bring that up so that as we move forward, that maybe we're having those conversations with the city of Orlando, since that growth area that we're looking at is mainly the city of Orlando.
Hey, great comments all. Any further comments? No? Yes, Ms. Moore.
I have been the wonderful recipient of about 6 or 7 new schools in the last few years, and I just wanted to add some different comments that I think were relevant to the conversation. One, in terms of the size of the site, and Commissioner Nelson will know this well. To save funding, we typically have prototype schools. So Lovell Elementary, Clay Springs Elementary, the exact same building. One is on just under 10 acres, and the other one is on 19 acres. And I can tell you the one on the 10 acres is completely adequate. Now, I was just telling him, you've got to go over and see all that land in the back, but it wasn't necessary. But that was done back in the day when we had the portables and the modular schools, and it certainly was needed at that time. But now that we're building more vertical, I really, really hope that we could look at lowering the size. And it was Commissioner Nelson and I were talking about Apopka High School on 38 acres. And I don't think we've ever had any conversations about it not being adequate size. In terms of the queuing with these new schools, Mr. Morris and his staff has done an outstanding job. And I have 4 or 5 schools where we, parentally had issues, and we weren't the best of neighbors. But today I can say that we are. And so the standards that they've been developing have really been adequate, and they work quite nicely. So we really do pride ourselves in trying to be good neighbors. And so finally, with the charter school, we have one in Ocoee, and I did a little bit of research I think you would find interesting. It's a small charter. It's about 240 students, and it's right in the heart of Ocoee. The children hail from 41 elementary schools, and only 35% are from Ocoee. So there certainly is a transportation impact that is much greater than what you'll see from a traditional public school. And so when we talk about the equity piece, we can't even address that because that's prohibited by state law. But there certainly is a greater impact when we're not dealing with neighborhood schools where there's a greater number of children walking, riding, and having safe walk routes. And so we really do look forward to working with you on that safe school walking route to reduce those transportation impacts more.
Ms. Cadle.
Well, and Ms. Moore brought something up, and if you notice the area of town I represent, there was very little of anything going on other than Wedgefield. But I think as we have this discussion of what size is the right size for school sites, I think we need to go and look at our schools that were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and look at the size of those sites. Lakemont Elementary was a real challenge in the beginning to build that because of the new requirements for stormwater retention. And it basically is a 12-acre site, I think, or 11-plus acres. So I think if we go back and we look at some of these, Winter Park High School is landlocked at 55 acres. And so when you start looking at what these schools looked like when they were built, I think Brookshire is another one. Brookshire's not at 15 acres. I think it's at 12. And so I think as we start looking at these, we have schools that we've had to rebuild that are not on these huge footprints. And so I think, you know, as you're getting the additional data together, let's take and look at some of those that have been rebuilt, that have been done with all of the stormwater requirements that are required now of keeping the property, keeping the water on our property, together with building those bus loops in there and, you know, not crossing the traffic so that, you know, we have a frame of reference that, you know, sometimes it is bigger, but sometimes they are not. And I don't know what the acreage is at the Winter Park 9th grade center, but it doesn't seem like a whole lot since the retention pond went in the back. So I think that would help as we're trying to look at the scale of this, is let's look at existing buildings that have been in this community for 50 years or 40 years.
Yes, Commissioner Clark.
But when Boone was yeah, we got to be careful. Ours are always on, so we just move them out of the way. But, you know, when Boone was rebuilt, you know, it was a pretty small campus. I went there, you know, back in the day. But it was an extensive taking of private homes when that was done. I don't know, there's over 100 private properties taken, 84 private homes taken to rebuild Boone. So when you look at the required acreage, I think you need to look in the future when these schools may need to be expanded, you know, have the property banked already, because Boone's a prime example. That's a poster child for looking at the size of the campuses you buy now, because at some point in time, somebody will be facing that issue. So 84 people lost their homes to expand Boone. Hopefully they were compensated adequately, but I'm not sure they were, but still, you know, that's one of the things you need to consider.
It's
Done that since that little exercise. If you notice, we learned by putting our hand on the hot burner, and we haven't used that as a solution.
But, you know, all good points, and actually taking property through condemnation is a very expensive proposition for us or any governmental entity, so it's something we try to avoid. You know, I will say I think that we can work through the acreage issue through the school siting ordinance, because one solution that occurs to me is to put into the siting ordinance some form of parking space requirements for school sites of the prototype size. For example, we're building a new downtown preschool through 8th grade school right near here, actually. And we actually are building an on-site parking facility or a parking garage on that school. And, you know, if you go to Chicago, or you go to LA or Seattle or San Francisco, any heavily urbanized environment, yeah, we're just inevitably we're going to have to figure out a way to build schools on smaller sites. You don't see 25-acre middle school sites, of course, in Chicago or in New York or even Houston or Dallas or more heavily urbanized areas, and we can't continue to do it. But we can have a requirement that we have to have so many parking spaces, and the commissioners are right, queuing is a big issue for us. We are now trying to build more queuing space. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer people allow their children to ride bikes or walk to school today, even when they're within a half mile to a mile of the school. We're finding that out more and more. But that may be one solution, is to put some type of parking requirement into our school sites if they're smaller acreage. As far as the hearing officer process modeled on Hillsborough, I will say it's taken on a life beyond what I had ever expected. What I do think we need fundamentally is a way to get an impartial arbiter to issue an opinion, even if it's a non-binding opinion. And I think that's critical. It can be non-binding, but somebody to take the emotions out of the situation we've recently found ourselves in, who can hear both sides. And even if they issue a non-binding opinion, at least that non-binding opinion would have the weight, whether it's in favor of the county on an issue or in favor of the school district on an issue, of allowing either side to say, well, listen, you know, a hearing officer heard both arguments from both sides and made this recommendation. I'm not as concerned that it be a binding recommendation at all, and I'm not as concerned personally to be upfront and to be getting part of the process, and I certainly don't want to take the public out of the process. But I'm also not naive enough to think that if a hearing officer issues a recommendation after hearing both sides, that it's going to be much tougher for either the school board or the county commission to go against that hearing officer's recommendation, because that will have been an impartial arbiter that will have heard that. And I think that's what we need to get to, because frankly, from both our perspectives, it's wholly inefficient for us to have to go to the courts to get that determination. And I think our board finds itself in a position of increasingly, if we can't find solutions, then we're forced to go to a court, but that's a lengthy process, an expensive process, and a far more adversarial process than we want. So how do we find a way to get somebody who takes the politics out of it to look at an issue and make a recommendation, even if it's just a recommendation? Mayor Jacobs?
Okay, well, I think we have one other person who wants to comment, and I'll just save my comments to close out if I could.
Who else? Anybody else queued up? Ms. Gould?
Mine is more about what's happening next. I know this was needed to happen with our joint staffs, kind of figuring out some parameters on where we can go and having this discussion between the joint boards. But especially in my area, we've definitely had public that want the opportunity to participate in the conversation and whatever that mechanism looks like. But also being in such a high growth area, market changes. We saw that in 2007, and there was a response to that. The market forces, those commercial market forces, often know ahead of us what is going to happen. And I feel like part of what we got caught in West Orange County was change in market, and government is sometimes just a little bit behind where market goes, at least in forecasting knowledge. And forecast is forecast. It's not reality always. But I just want to make sure that we are utilizing not people who have vested interest in particular property, but experts in our community as we look at this, and especially as we look forward in land banking potentials, because I think that in particular is even more important than the specific school siting ordinance component, but as we're looking forward. So I was wondering, I know we talked a little bit about next steps, but where do we see going from here, and how do we make sure that we're capturing all those people who have been talking in our ears for the last couple of years?
Mayor Jacobs, you want to
Yes. In terms of where we go for here, I was hoping I was going to close this out, but where we go from here, I think our staffs are going to take what they've heard. We're going to work through some of the questions that we still have. I think that we've given staff some clear direction on some areas that we want a little more specificity. Heard a lot of conversation about school size. Interestingly enough, my children went to Metro West Elementary School, probably your largest elementary school, 25 acres. And there isn't a day when I make the unfortunate mistake of driving by in the afternoon when school lets out. I hardly ever do that, but occasionally I make that mistake. And I fear for the fact that if we ever had to get an emergency vehicle through, we wouldn't be able to. So it's not all about size. It is about configuration. It's about how you use the land, but it's also about the road network. And that's some of the things that is always going to make this a little difficult. But we're going to look to staff to come back to us with some recommendations on how we can be more sensitive. I understand the cost of land. I think we all do understand the request for flexibility. And I think we'd all like to have flexibility as long as the end product is one that works for our kids, for our surrounding community. And so that ought to be our goal. As far as, certainly we will be having at the end of this a public hearing. Commissioner Boyd mentioned a year, 2 years. It would certainly be my hope that we're not talking about that far out. But I don't want to put a firm deadline on when we would be coming back for a public hearing. There will be more dialogue before we're in a public hearing. I'm sure that you all will be meeting, we will be meeting, there'll be more communication. But I do appreciate the comments that were made about the relationship that we have enjoyed and will continue to enjoy, and kind of like a family. I think Kat and our member Gordon and I can certainly say that. We mostly get along. I adore you, and occasionally you're not happy with me. And you know what? But, but the reality is when you care about things and you're passionate about things, you're going to speak your mind. And occasionally it's not going to look so pretty. But the only thing worse than not speaking your mind and it not looking pretty is biting your tongue and not communicating and doing what we need to do. And this is a really important part of it. And I want to commend you, Bill, Superintendent Jenkins down there, the staff, and all of our school board members and Orange County Commissioners for coming together and always putting our community and our kids first.
Mayor, that's a great place to end. Commissioners, thank you for this conversation. I personally have found it very productive, and we really appreciate it. With that, we are adjourned.
A baby is born. Cute. He's already surrounded by technology. By age 4, she knows how to use a smartphone. He's reading. No, not from this. This. She's making a digital presentation. You don't even know what that is. He has an interest. No, not that. That. By middle school, she has built her own website and her first app. In high school,
with my Michelson interferometer, I can measure down to the fraction of the wavelength of light.
Wow. The world is changing. And they are preparing for jobs that don't even exist yet.